Tom Petty was born in Gainesville, Florida, on October 20th, 1950, a small southern city drenched in humidity, mosquitoes, and a strange, simmering mix of beauty and bitterness. His father, Earl, was a hard-drinking, often violent man who worked in insurance. His mother, Kitty, was quiet, tender, and exhausted. For Tom, home wasn't safe, so he looked elsewhere. He found his escape in music. As a kid, Tom was small, shy, and withdrawn. He didn't talk much, but he listened to Elvis Presley, to the Everly Brothers, and to the radio that played everything from Hank Williams to Little Richard. When he was 10, a chance encounter changed everything. Elvis came to Gainesville to film a movie, and Tom watched as the king of rock and roll stepped out of a Cadillac, smiled, and waved. That moment flipped a switch. "I saw a rock star," he later said, "and I wanted to be one." Petty's childhood wasn't marked by privilege or clear direction. It was defined by emotional survival. His father beat him. His school didn't understand him. But by the time he was 13, he had a guitar, and that was enough. He practiced obsessively. He listened to the Byrds, the Rolling Stones, and Dylan. He joined garage bands. His first group, the Sundowners, mostly played covers. But even then, people noticed his voice nasal, strange, but raw and hypnotic. Gainesville wasn't a music city, but for Petty, it was the perfect proving ground, small, overlooked, and full of stories waiting to be sung. In 1970, Tom Petty formed a new band called Mudcrutch. The group included Mike Campbell on guitar and Benmont Tench on keyboards, two musicians who would follow Petty for most of his life. Mudcrutch was a strange mix of southern swamp rock, folk, and stoner psychedelia. They didn't look like stars. They looked like college kids who skipped class to jam, because that's what they were. They played local bars, Gainesville dives, and frat parties. Their sound was uneven, their ambition massive. In 1974, they decided to take a gamble. They packed up their gear, drove cross-country to Los Angeles, and started knocking on doors. One opened. Shelter Records gave them a deal, but the dream fell apart quickly. Their 1975 debut single, Depot Street, flopped. The label didn't get the sound. The band splintered. By the end of the year, Mudcrutch was dead. But Petty wasn't. Even as his band fell apart, his vision sharpened. The label noticed that he, not the group, had the presence, the songs, and the drive. So they offered him a solo deal. Petty agreed, but only if he could bring his guys back in a new form. That's how the Heartbreakers were born, with Mike Campbell, Benmont Tench, Ron Blair on bass, and Stan Lynch on drums. Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers released their self-titled debut in 1976. It wasn't an immediate hit in the US, but across the Atlantic, in England, it exploded. American Girl became a cult classic. Breakdown hit the top 40, and just like that, the shy kid from Gainesville was on his way to becoming the voice of working-class rock in a world that didn't think it needed one. When Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers started to catch fire in the late 70s, it was a strange time to be a guitar-based rock band. Disco ruled the charts. Punk was blowing up in London and New York. Arena rock was already bloated, but somehow Petty carved a lane right through the middle, part Bird's Jangle, part Southern swagger, part no bullshit garage grit, and people couldn't get enough. The band's second album, You're Gonna Get It, dropped in 1978 and showed they weren't just lucky, they were consistent. I Need to Know and Listen to Her Heart proved Petty had a knack for melodies that sounded familiar and timeless at the same time. But as the fame started rising, so did the pressure. Touring got heavier. The business side started flexing its power, and Petty, who had grown up resisting control, started to feel the squeeze. Then came Damn, the Torpedoes' 1979, the breakthrough. It wasn't just a hit, it was a full-blown rock and roll moment. Refugee, Don't Do Me Like That, and Here Comes My Girl tore up the charts. Suddenly, Petty wasn't just opening for bigger acts. He was the main event. Critics finally gave him his due. Rolling Stone called him one of the only true heirs to Dylan and Springsteen. But even in victory, Petty didn't trust the machine. While most artists were riding the wave, he was in a legal war. In 1979, as Damn the Torpedoes was being prepped for release, Tom Petty made a move that most artists wouldn't dare. He sued his own record label. His original deal with Shelter Records had been bought out by MCA, who now wanted to assign him to one of their sublabels. Petty refused. He saw it as a trap, another way to tie him down and control his work. When he pushed back, MCA sued for breach of contract. So Petty doubled down. He filed for bankruptcy, not because he was broke, but to avoid being bound to a label he didn't trust. "I'd rather go bankrupt than be owned," he told reporters. It was bold, defiant, and risky, but it worked. Eventually, MCA backed down and offered him a fair deal under a new label, Backstreet Records, with more creative freedom. Damn the Torpedoes was finally released and became a platinum smash. Petty had not only protected his art, he'd made a point that echoed through the industry. Musicians could fight back and win. What set Petty apart wasn't just the music, it was the way he stood his ground. In an era where most artists kept quiet and followed the money, he stared down the suits and said, no. That same defiance would follow him into the next decade, where he'd take on another label, another fight over album pricing, and the challenge of becoming something few rock stars ever survive long enough to be: a trusted voice. By the mid-1980s, Tom Petty had become one of the most respected rock artists in America, but behind the success, he was fraying. Years of touring, label battles, and personal strain had started to wear him down. He was searching for something deeper, not just musically, but emotionally. That's when he began working on Southern Accents, 1985, an album that was supposed to reconnect him with his Southern roots. Petty envisioned it as a concept album about the South, not the cliché version, but the conflicted, beautiful, flawed place he came from. Songs like Rebels and Southern Accents carried themes of identity, regret, and broken history. But the project didn't go as planned. The sessions were tense. Petty, increasingly controlling in the studio, clashed with producers. At one point, in a moment of rage, he punched a wall and broke his left hand so badly it required surgery. The album still produced hits like Don't Come Around Here No More, a psychedelic departure choriton with Dave Stewart of Eurythmics. The song became an MTV staple, complete with a bizarre Alice in Wonderland-themed video. But Petty later admitted the album didn't become what he'd hoped. The Southern story got lost in production shifts, label pressure, and internal burnout. Personally, he was falling apart. His marriage to Jane Benyo was unraveling. He was becoming more isolated, more withdrawn. Friends noticed he was starting to self-medicate, quietly but dangerously. The smiling, lanky frontman on stage was hiding something he wasn't ready to admit even to himself. Just when it seemed like Petty might drift into creative uncertainty, something unexpected happened. In 1988, he was invited to a casual jam session with George Harrison, Bob Dylan, Roy Orbison, and Jeff Lynne. What started as a one-off gathering to record a B-side turned into the Traveling Wilburys, a supergroup unlike anything in rock history. There were no egos, no big label expectations, just 5 legends writing songs in a garage, having fun. Petty once said, "It was the most relaxed I'd ever been making music." Their first album, Volume 1, was a surprise hit. Songs like Handle with Care and End of the Line reminded the world that rock could still be warm, collaborative, and honest. For Petty, it was a reset. Being around legends like Orbison and Dylan helped him recalibrate. It reminded him why he fell in love with music in the first place. It also laid the groundwork for one of his most acclaimed solo efforts, Full Moon Fever, 1989. Produced by Jeff Lynne, Full Moon Fever gave us Free Fallin', I Won't Back Down, and Runnin' Down a Dream. It was bright, clear, and unshakably catchy. A new sound without losing his soul. After years of fights, fatigue, and near collapse, Petty was reborn. The album went multi-platinum. He wasn't just a rock veteran. He was now a generational voice. But while his career surged forward, darker personal battles were still bubbling beneath the surface. In the 1990s, Tom Petty was everywhere, still selling out stadiums, still writing hit records, and still commanding respect in every corner of the music world. But beneath the public success was a private collapse. Years of pressure, unresolved trauma from childhood, the collapse of his marriage, and an overwhelming need to maintain control had taken their toll. Quietly, Tom Petty slipped into a heroin addiction, something almost no one knew about at the time. Petty was in his late 40s when the addiction took hold. Unusually late for rock and roll. It wasn't about partying. It was about pain management, emotional escape. He later admitted that it wasn't about chasing a high. It was about numbing everything. In his own words, taking the edge off became taking the edge off the edge. Meanwhile, his home life was literally going up in flames. In 1987, an arsonist burned down his Encino home while he, his wife, and his daughter were inside. Everyone escaped, but the trauma was lasting. Petty later said he believed the fire was meant to kill him. The only part of the house that didn't burn, his basement studio. He rebuilt the house, bigger, stronger, more secure. But symbolically, it was never really the same. He became more guarded, more inward. He trusted fewer people. And yet, despite the pain, Petty never stopped working. In 1994, he released Wildflowers, widely considered his masterpiece. It was stripped down, deeply introspective, and emotionally raw. You don't know how it feels. It's good to be king. And the title track revealed a man confronting his demons in real time. Critics hailed it. Fans embraced it. And for the first time, Petty stopped hiding behind metaphor and started writing about himself. Wildflowers marked a shift in Petty's career and in his life. The album had been produced by Rick Rubin, known more for hip-hop and metal than folk rock, but their chemistry was undeniable. Rubin stripped away the polish. He let Petty's voice crack, let the band make mistakes, and what came out was perhaps the most human record Petty ever made. But behind the sessions, Petty was still suffering. He'd separated from his first wife, Jane, after 2 decades of marriage. The divorce was painful, especially for their daughters. At the same time, his addiction was deepening. Eventually, a close friend and his second wife, Dana York, staged a quiet intervention. It worked. Petty got clean, not through public drama or scandal, but through therapy, patience, and time. He later said it was the hardest thing he'd ever done, but it gave him clarity. It helped him reconnect with his children, and it pushed him deeper into his craft. In the years that followed, Petty continued to release solid records, Echo, The Last DJ, and Highway Companion. He also reunited with the Heartbreakers, rejoined the Wilburys briefly, and became an elder statesman of rock. And yet, he never stopped defending the music. He railed against record companies for price gouging. He called out fake nostalgia. He refused to license his songs for commercials he didn't believe in. He sued promoters. He stood up for new artists. And through it all, he stayed fiercely uncompromising. The same way he was when he was 26 and filing for bankruptcy just to keep control of his name. Petty had grown older, yes, but he had not grown soft. In 2017, Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers embarked on their 40th anniversary tour. It was a massive run, over 50 shows across North America, filled with generations of fans who had grown up with his music. Petty was 66. He moved slower. His face was thinner, but the voice, still unmistakable. The songs, timeless. Behind the scenes, though, Petty was in pain, literally. He had a fractured hip, but refused to cancel the tour. He powered through every show, often grimacing in silence, not wanting to let anyone down. He felt a duty to the fans, said friends later. He wasn't going to stop. What no one knew was just how dangerous that choice would be. On October 2nd, 2017, just 1 week after finishing the tour at the Hollywood Bowl, Tom Petty died from an accidental overdose of pain medication, a lethal mix of opioids including fentanyl. The news hit like a gut punch. One of the last true rock poets was gone, not from a fiery crash or a public spiral, but quietly at home, trying to manage the pain from doing what he loved. Fans mourned across the world. Tributes poured in, from Bruce Springsteen, Bob Dylan, Stevie Nicks, Eddie Vedder. Radio stations went silent. Candlelight vigils were held. But through all of it, there was one thread. Tom Petty had always told the truth. Whether it was "I Won't Back Down" or "Even the Losers," his songs never lied. He sang for the underdog, the brokenhearted, the rebel, the dreamer. And even when the world changed around him, he stayed rooted, not in image or genre, but in soul. Tom Petty didn't chase fame. He didn't fake rebellion. He didn't sell out stadiums just to cash in. He stood up for his music. And by doing that, he stood up for all of us who needed it. He once said, "Music is probably the only real magic I have encountered in my life." Maybe that's why his songs still feel like spells. Simple, real, unforgettable. Let us know in the comments. What Tom Petty song got you through something? Where were you when you first heard Free Fallin' or Refugee? Like the video, subscribe to Southern Sound, and ring the bell if you believe the real voices of rock should never fade away. This was the story of Tom Petty, the kid from Gainesville who gave America its own soundtrack. And somewhere out there, he's still running down a dream,